Good afternoon and welcome back to Talk About It Tuesday with the CUNY Athletic Conference. I'm Ryan Martin, the Director of Inclusive and Adaptive Sports for the CUNY Athletic Conference. And today I get the distinct pleasure of welcoming two of our CUNY alumni to talk about what they're doing now in the professional sports space. So looking forward to this conversation. We're going to just jump right into this. So Brian, Edgar, thank you guys for joining us and sharing your story and your experience with our student athletes who are on this call today. Edgar, we're going to start with you. Edgar, can you give us a little bit of background? What your major was, the sports you played, and kind of what you're doing now.
Of course, and thank you, Ryan. And hi, Brian. And yeah, a little bit of myself. I'm the old one in the group. I graduated Baruch College back in 2009, right in the middle of a recession. I was a business journalism major there, started marketing. They switched like 15 different times and then ended up doing journalism when I realized that was something that I wanted to pursue. And then since then, I've been lucky to be involved in professional sports for the past 10 years. I started as an intern at Major League Soccer as an editor for their website in Spanish, and then ended up working a couple of years in Los Angeles covering the Lakers and the Dodgers. And then in 2016, I returned to New York City, working for the Madison Square Garden, doing their MSG Go app for the Knicks and for the Rangers and the Islanders. And for the past 2.5 years, I've been working for FC Bayern Munich, the German soccer club. And I basically manage all their communications for the Americans. So North America, South America, all that stuff. So it's been a fun ride so far.
Awesome, super exciting. I look forward to getting into kind of what your day-to-day looked like previous to COVID and what it is now and kind of how you ended up there. Obviously, a really interesting journey. Brian, same with you. How about you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background for all those who are on this call?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And it's a fun moment for me being on the other side of the camera today, whereas usually I'm in Ryan's position. So again, thank you to the CUNY Conference for having me on, and nice to meet you, Edgar. So a little bit about me. I'm pretty fresh out, so I'm not too much older than probably most of the people on this call. I graduated from Baruch College in 2019 with a BA in corporate communications, and I had the good fortune of being able to kind of parlay that into my exact career, what I'm doing now today. So I do PR for the New York Liberty. I'm the PR assistant. So all things related to media, players, and the front office, I'm in the nitty gritty of it, assisting my director, and it's a really fun experience, a lot of hands-on work with the players, and it's been great. It's been a great ride so far. So backtracking a little bit, I played 4 years of baseball at Baruch, which was an amazing experience. And then come graduation time, I didn't necessarily have a job lined up. So funny enough is Terry Acosta, who was the head athletic trainer with Baruch. She took a job with the New York Liberty. She got the head athletic training job there. She brought me down just kind of on a limb just to see really if they needed some extra help. And fortunately, that's really all I needed. Got some great experience there, worked with tremendous people, taught me so much. And then that ultimately turned into my full-time position. I got hired in February full-time as the PR assistant.
Great, that's awesome. And you told Edgar and I that you were throwing over 100 when you pitched at Baruch.
I did not say that.
So Kim in the background
don't lie, Brian. Don't lie.
That. Kim is trying to verify that fact, and if any of his former teammates are on this call and want to text in, by all means, feel free.
I'll let the people handle that. John Nevis.
Yeah, so this is going to kind of be a free-flowing conversation, and we'll kind of take it wherever it goes. But to kind of start with, you guys were both student athletes at Baruch. And every student athlete, right? D1, D2, D3 has like their hallmark moment, their hallmark memory. Edgar, what about your student athlete days? What sticks out to you?
Well, as some of my Baruch former teammates might attest, I actually trained a lot more than I actually played. I was that very versatile player that could play in any role and position. So I got my playing time in. But in my entire, I want to say 4-year career, 2 in SUNY school and then 2 at Baruch playing soccer, I scored 1 goal. So
Nice.
that was like my highlight. Never mind, we're winning already like 8-1. I think we're beating Brooklyn College or something like that. But obviously in soccer, it's quite difficult to score a goal, especially if you're not playing forward at times. And I was playing in a defensive position. So, and it was actually quite a nice one where I sidestep a guy and then shot it in a very nice way. So, that will stick with me because I was finally like, okay, I can do it other than running around and doing the hard work. I can actually do the pretty stuff too. So that was great.
Nice. Brian, what about you? That 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
Again, I appreciate the plug there, Ryan, but I'd have to say, and being a pitcher, it's a little bit of an individual game, right? Like you're the guy up there. It's really only you and the catcher, and obviously you have your defense going, but you're in total control. So there's obviously a few performances that I look back on, and those really stick out, and those are some great memories. But I have to say, more importantly than all that was last year in 2019. Bringing home that 2019 CUNYAC championship for the first time in 7 years. So that doesn't even compare to any individual achievement throughout the 4 years. That was just such a long time coming for us. We had really went through it as a program. We were right there every time, and saw a lot of guys graduate empty-handed, unfortunately. So my senior year, we were able to win the championship, and we ended up making it all the way to the NCAA tournament, which is the first time in 20 something years, I believe. So that was a great experience, and that's definitely something I'll never forget. And having the ring to show it is definitely a cool memory.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So both of you guys transitioned from your student athlete days to work in pro sports. And we obviously know the sensation of scoring that goal or winning that championship is something unique and different. How would you say working in professional sports has filled that void, or is it something different that you feel versus competing? Brian, we'll let you fire off on this one first.
Sure. And Ryan, I think you hit it right on the head when it's quite literally a void, right? Like you talk about sports being such a part of your life, and just that being out there and being able to be competitive, right? I missed competition like crazy. But that being said, it's probably the next best thing is to be able to work in pro sports, surrounded by that environment, surrounded by professional athletes on a daily basis, and really translating what we learn on the field and being a student athlete at Baruch into our professional careers in pro sports. So that's really been the biggest thing for me. Is it's been a seamless transition, but I feel like it's where I belong and where my talents are going to be best really utilized in that environment.
Absolutely, good answer. You're definitely.
I think for me, obviously, I think as every student athlete would relate to what I'm going to say, but especially Division III athletes, you don't get a lot back for what you put in. You do it because you really love it. You really love getting out there, and not just the games. You love the training. You love, the companionship. So when you're done with that, there's definitely, and you said it, Ryan, and Brian, you as well, there's a void. There's something that's missing. For me, I was going for business journalism at the time, and honestly, in my mind, I wasn't really making a connection to staying professional sports. What I was doing was coaching soccer on the side because I really like being close to the sport. And basically just the 2 careers ended up just, my writing career and my, love for sports just ended up, meeting at one point. And I feel that I was very lucky that happened. But at the same time, it's you do that because you really love it and you really like it. So I've been lucky that in professional sports, we're able to see that every day, not just from the athletes, because as athletes, we, we like to compete and we like to go at it. You see it from everybody around your organization. Anybody who has an education in sports knows that you want to go there and win. So you apply that in your job as well. And it's quite easy to go, whether you're behind the computer, doing some kind of preparing some kind of an interview or something like that, or you are in a field playing, is the same feeling. It's the same feeling that you want to do the best that you can do. And that's something that you can definitely take away from being a student athlete.
Great, yeah, that's a good point. So the game changed, but that competitive nature still stays with it. The other thing too, I think that is really interesting, and you guys could probably elaborate on this more too. Sports, especially at the collegiate level, it's competitive, right? It's not like it's not all inclusive, right? You have to have an ability level, and you guys are both in careers that are highly desirable. So do you see like that same competitive nature to kind of move up and all of that, like because I think both your career tracks a lot of ex-athletes. So do you see that mentality a lot in what you guys do?
Absolutely,
And,
I see it.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I've been lucky in the sense that even though I was, a student athlete, and I am competitive. I don't know if it was in my home, my family, my parents, my brothers. I mean, I have two brothers, so we're always competing, but there was always a very big emphasis in having fun. So like, as much as I wanted to win, I was never going into a game really stressed out. Like I gotta win. Like I wanted to win, but it was always about having fun with it. Ultimately, I like soccer, and that's my sport because I enjoy it primarily more than like the winning and the losing part of it. I just really enjoy it. I enjoy games where I'm just like going at it. So I've approached my career in the same way. So, and that's helped me cope with this whole concept of, people want, like, competing in an environment, or being, having to be the absolute best at something, and just kind of like just focusing inward and showing what I can do. And then, just like in a team, you have guys who are particularly good at doing a particular thing, whether that's scoring a goal or defending or being a goalkeeper. The same thing in your workplace, you have a bunch of guys that can be really good at other things. So I think I've been lucky in the sense that I can relate to a lot of people and not be like the guy who has to do it all, but just kind of like, collaborate with others. So that helps in terms of the competition, because in professional sports, it obviously exists. Everybody wants those jobs. The product itself is winning. So right now I'm working for Bayern Munich. It's a team that has been winning everything. So now the fans demand that every season in Germany, we have to win. If we lose a game, and it doesn't matter what game it is, everybody's pissed off at you. So there's this mentality of like, you always have to be performing, always. So the thing that I remind myself is like, ultimately, I'm not a surgeon, like nobody's gonna die. So I'm just gonna have fun with it, and then just give people the best that I can give.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. I think that's why a lot of ex-athletes are attracted to that type of job and that type of profession. Brian, do you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off Edgar there. It's just a matter of like how directly our backgrounds really translate over into this field. So my boss and I talk about it all the time. She played Division I basketball. Most of the people on our staff played college sports in some capacity or another. So you put that all together, and you really kind of bring that team environment back to the forefront, where I think it really fits well in that pro sports field. So just putting all the experiences, and again, just those things that you learn along the way, to be able to then translate that over, I think it really bodes well, and it allows you to operate in a field that's kind of stressful sometimes. Things happen quickly, and to really not get rattled, and to really keep your center and just go about the work. So I think everything's really related as far as background to our current fields right now.
Gotcha. So Brian, you had mentioned that you didn't necessarily have a plan, right? Like you were going to school, you were a student athlete. So a lot of our students are going to be facing a very interesting employment climate, coming up recently. What would be some of the advice that you would give them as somebody who's kind of newly navigated this transition?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. First off, I'd say once I realized that I wanted to work in pro sports, but wasn't exactly sure how to go about it, the first thing that popped into my head is, let me get a master's degree. That'll help. And that really came in part with a lot of the conversation I had with some of the Baruch Athletics administration, most of whom have their master's degrees. So much so that I'm actually in the same program that our athletic director, Heather McCullough, was in several years ago at Adelphi University. So that being said, I think there is a lot of value in graduate education, especially in our field. I feel like that's a tool in your tool belt that will allow you to, either open a door or try to work your way up. So that's first and foremost. So I'd recommend it if that's a possibility for some students to look into grad school. And secondarily, it's a funny story, but I was sitting at Barclays Center for graduation with Baruch, and it is really crazy how things work. But I was sitting there worried about what I'm going to do and where my job is. And where my seat was, our office is about 40 feet right in front of me. Like, you know, I was literally like quite like staring at like where we were going to be working. So it's a pretty crazy visual. And of course, it's just some good luck there as far as being at Barclays Center. But I guess my message would be to like, it's okay to not have it all figured out at first. And it's kind of tough when some of your friends, they're getting some job offers right out of like college. So for me, it's just a matter of staying that course. And fortunately I did. I put in the work, and then my office is literally right there, right in the very same spot where I was worried about where I was going to work. So.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, probably some really good advice to follow up on that is like you just explored a hunch, right? Like somebody said, hey, come down here. I'm working. Let's see if this fits for you, right? And I think just taking every opportunity you have, especially in this climate, is really good advice. No.
Yeah, that's 100% on, Ryan. So I think there's really no opportunity that you shouldn't at least explore, right? Whether that's with a pro sports organization, a club team, just whatever it really takes just to start building up that resume to a little bit more on the sports side. Like there's really no opportunity at this point that I think anyone should overlook, especially given the times. But of course, things will recover in due time as well. So it's really just a matter of kind of staying patient, staying positive, mostly because you want to keep that good attitude, because I think that will also take you places when the opportunities arise.
For sure. Edgar, so you've been in your career a little bit longer and have transitioned from different groups. Aside from the obvious that Bayern Munich is, you know, a international brand, what drew you to that position, and was that what you coveted? You know, a larger European soccer club versus maybe working in a startup with MLS or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I just like Ryan said, I also didn't have a plan going to school. Obviously, you wanna believe that you wanna do certain things, but even at school, and I remember I had a lot of conversations with like Coach Penny and Coach Dima at the time for the Baruch soccer team and the guys and everybody. And of course, during those days, there's a lot about like being motivated, right? There's a lot of motivation happening because you're going to a soccer field at 6:30 in the morning and you have to run and then there's little things, kind of like you have to run 3 miles in 18 minutes. I've never done that in my life, you know? And then you're like trying to motivate you to do that kind of stuff. So then that kind of creates a certain mentality. Now me, if you guys can hear from my accent, I'm not American. I'm originally from Colombia. And then when I went to my journalism career, it was at a time where journalism was changing. And there's a lot of people that are going to tell you, oh, you're doing it wrong. You're not doing it right. You're not, you know. And then when I said that I wanted to be a writer, they're like, dude, you don't even speak English correctly. You know, so there's a lot of people that are going to be like, just believe in that. Even if the primary goal wasn't, you don't know exactly what that is, just believe in the things that you have to offer. So soccer for me has always been a passion, and obviously to work in an European soccer club, the current champion of the Champions League, the guys that are playing Real Madrid, Barcelona, it's a dream come true. Like I tell everybody, it's like sometimes I cannot believe that I'm in this position covering that team. But then you look at your story back and all the teachings, the mornings going out there, the different things that you did while you were in the school, and if you have the plan, it's like what Brian said, just kind of like trust and believe that you can do that stuff, and then get creative. So the one example that I always give is I was working at Baruch. I was going to school at Baruch. I was playing soccer at Baruch, and I was also doing some work study at the Weizmann Center for International Business, which, by the way, if there's Baruch students listening, you guys should visit because they will help you with internships, study abroad, all that kind of stuff. So I used to work there, and I was an office assistant, and I didn't have a lot to do. So this was, and I'm super old saying this, but this was before the time of Twitter, before the time of Facebook. So I was reading a lot of like ESPN articles. And one thing that I did was I was reading a lot of like soccer news, and sometimes at the bottom of those articles, they have the email address of the writer. So I started collecting those emails, and I was just writing emails. I was asking them, hey, my name is Edgar. I'm a senior at Baruch College. I play soccer, this and that. And I just had one question for you. I know you're a busy person. How do I do what you do? And I sent a bunch of those emails. I probably sent like 200 emails. Only 2 people replied. And one of the people that replied, there was this guy named Michael Lewis who worked for the New York Times, and he told me about the MLS internships. And that's how the whole thing started. It's like, oh, apply to this link. They were looking for somebody who spoke Spanish and English. And that's basically how it developed. So and like I said, I graduated in 2009. It was a time of recession. Obviously, it's not as hard a time as now during the pandemic. But like Brian said, things are going to change. At the time, I was also freaking out because there was no, like you didn't know where things were going to go. But if you keep going with it and you trust your skills, something's going to happen. You just have to keep on knocking on doors. So ultimately, yeah, I mean, to work at Bayern, I don't know what's next for me. I mean, I'm still not that old. So I want to see what else I can do. But it's definitely a pinnacle. It's definitely been an amazing experience. And I've learned a lot, especially in international business.
So, so you and I had this conversation because we both spent significant time in Europe and different things like that. How do you explain soccer or football to an American, right? Because remember I told you that I lived in Madrid, and like it was like a whole new world of sports to me, being somebody who grew up in the Northeast. It was the Yankees and Red Sox, and I thought that was a big rivalry until it was El Clásico or the Derby, right? Different things like that. So if you can, and I realize I'm asking you such a huge question, how do you describe European soccer, especially with a organization as complex and successful as Bayern Munich?
So, I mean, first you have to realize who you're talking to, because, and I'll give a little bit of an anecdote. Like whenever I go to like a party or go to like a gathering or something like that, and somebody says, oh, this guy works at Bayern Munich, I always get 2 responses. One is like, oh my God, that's effing awesome, blah, 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 That's one response. The second response is like, Bayern, what? Is that like the aspirin company? So you get a spectrum of people that are either very knowledgeable about the game or not knowledgeable about the game. So the first thing that I try to do is, if it's somebody that knows about the game, I don't want to try to explain something that they already know. I think people know what soccer is. Soccer is a very simple game. You have a ball, you have goals, and the point is to put it in the back of the net. It's a very simple concept. If you like that, that's great. If you don't like that, that's fine too. But it's a very, very, very simple thing. When it comes to European soccer, the way that I would describe it is, I mean, it has to do a lot with excitement. When you talk about like a classicer, like what does everybody make such a big deal about this? You go back to, for example, somebody who likes the Yankees or somebody who likes, the Patriots, and you go back to that tradition and that history. That's the first part that we can relate it to another team, whether it's like somebody who likes the Jordan Chicago Bulls. It's like, think about how you feel about that team. If whoever I'm talking to or whatever sport they follow, there are people out there where this sport in Europe has been around for over 100 years. So you have generations of people just enjoying this in the way that you enjoy your sport. So the game might be different, but the feeling is the same. You feel identified to a certain group. Whether you like the game or not, whether you like games that end 0-0 or not, give it a chance. It's a lot easier when you get to go to a stadium in Europe, because then just the energy alone just takes you over. But if it's something that you're just explaining, I would kind of try to figure out what that sport people like is, and then go from there and make those connections, which incidentally is kind of what I do for work. I try to make, when I present Bayern Munich to an American audience or to a Latin American audience, I connected to things that people, that people connect with. So one example is when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes, obviously was like the big thing that people were talking about. He's obviously a very, visual player. He knows where to put the ball. His eye sees where the person needs to go. We had a player who recently left us, Thiago Alcantara from Spain, who has the same kind of style of play. Gets the ball, sees where the person is, And so, and puts it right there. So we did like a little bit of a content piece where they're both talking about their jobs and then talking each other's jobs and how that connects. And that's a couple of ways on how you can, like relate to people who are not necessarily adept to soccer, but could understand how it can be really cool because you're making those connections.
Yeah, ironically, one of the stories people ask me that same question about my time in Europe is the very first time I went to a Spanish woman's home that I was dating. I met with the whole family, and the father asked me one question. He said, "¿Quién es tu equipo por fútbol?" Y yo dicho que, hey, Tom Brady es el mejor. And dice que, ¿quién es Tom Brady? So he was like, wait, what? And like, so for me as an American, like I knew about soccer, but it was also like, he wanted me to say Real Madrid. And if I didn't say Real Madrid, I wasn't welcomed at his table. And so I think it's hard for people to, understand the passion in which, like, the team you cheer for isn't the team you chose. It's who your family told you were going to support. And
it's a very mental thing.
Decades of it.
Yeah, it's a very mental thing because, for example, me, when I came to the US, I could not stand baseball. Sorry, Brian. But I really couldn't deal with it. I thought it was boring, the way to watch it. And then when I moved to LA and I was able to cover the Dodgers, incidentally, because I was on soccer, you see a guy like Clayton Kershaw throwing a ball and you're like, that is the hardest skill ever. And to be able to hit that with a stick, that's insane. Like, it's absolutely insane, the kind of things that you can do. So you kind of realize that you don't have all the knowledge there. And it's just the kind of thing where you're like, like you just learn. And and I think that's an opportunity here in the US, especially in a place like CUNY. You have so many nationalities, so many different people, so much diversity, that if you're open to learning, like that's something that I have really been able to take advantage of by going to a CUNY school.
That's a good answer. Brian, so I'm going to give you this question in the chat, and you being the student athlete, this is going to hit you close to home because recently having played. So it says, if you were in a situation where you couldn't play your sport for a semester, like most CUNY students are now, what would you do to use this time productively?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's no more fitting than the times right now, right? So that being said, I mean, I always found the fall semester, we'd have a smaller season. That's what most sports do. We call it like non-traditional season. But even in the fall, I just felt like it was that much easier to kind of keep up on school. First and foremost, like really just those have to be your semesters where you're coming close to that 4.0, and you can really just hit the books and not have to focus on balancing both. But that being said, I mean, given the times right now, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, at least to take some time to, if nothing else, just reflect and say, like, what do I think I can do with like my career path, and like, where do I see myself going based on my skills, my background? And then from there, I mean, the internet is really your best friend, and there's a ton of resources, especially within pro sports, as far as looking out and researching some of the job opportunities that might be open. So if nothing else, even if you're applying just for internships left and right, hundreds, like Edgar said, and even I went through the same thing where I was applying to probably close to 50 internships all said and done. Mm-hmm. So if nothing else, just to get on top of that, because it's one of those things that kind of slide through the cracks when you're playing, you're going to school, and it's like, oh, I should probably get a nice internship, So I'd almost use this time to really focus in on what is it that you want to do, and then from there create some form of an actionable plan as far as how are we going to get there. So that's probably my best answer as it applies to that.
Okay. So Brian, this is a question that I have for you, and we kind of discussed it during the pre-meet, but sure. So you this new job, really excited. The WNBA is poised to have this, this almost this rebirth, right? And it's now becoming trendy to support the WNBA, and whack, we come in the middle of this pandemic and your number one pick goes down. Describe your first 6 months working for the Liberty. Like, cause this is, I mean, control what you can control, but that's a lot of variables that you can't.
Oh, absolutely. So I was hired officially in February. I didn't start until March 1st. So that being said, NBA offices across the league shut down on March 11th. So that gave me about a week and a day. at the office with the team and everything. So that being said, it's been as non-traditional of a first year probably as you could have drawn up. But that being said, I also feel like it's just important to be adaptable and really just kind of roll with the punches, because that's all any of us can do right now during these times. So fast forward a few months down the road, the WNBA comes out with a really good plan, in my opinion, to put on a season. So Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, they made a partnership with IMG Academy down in Bradenton, Florida, to essentially put on a single site wubble season is what they called it. So they did a tremendous job doing that. Everything was really, really well run from what I heard on the ground. Unfortunately, I couldn't travel with the team, but my boss and a lot of the other staff members were able to go. So they did a really good job testing the players, making sure everyone stayed safe primarily. And then from there, just we had to get a little creative. So every press conference was exactly like this. I was the guy behind the scenes most of the time, making sure I'm recording, everyone's muted, unmuted, and while my boss was moderating. But then there's other times where I had to hop in, like media day, for example. Normal business and media day, you have the different stations and your local and even some national media are there to interview your players. We couldn't do that this year. So we did a one giant media day on Zoom that I moderated while my boss was on the ground with the players, taking everyone through the station. So that was a really cool experience for me, really early on in my career. And fortunately, everything went well. But I guess just going back to my point is it took everyone to be adaptable, creative, and really just kind of open-minded to see how are we going to put on this season and not lose this the momentum that you were talking about there. So I think we were able to do that. And despite obviously the season didn't go the way we had hoped, with that being said, I think we're really poised for the next few years to really, really have some success here.
Yeah, very true. So let me ask you a quick aside from that. How was your job different when Sabrina Ionescu was in the lineup versus not in the lineup, right?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good point. And even we'll back it up a little bit to virtual draft, right? So we were the first ones. We were before the NFL, and like most things, we were kind of the first ones going through a lot of this. And fortunately, we did a good job every step of the way. But that being said, virtual draft, one of Sabrina's tremendous athlete, one of the most highly touted players coming out of college since Breanna Stewart, Maya Moore. So that being said, there was definitely a lot of Sabrina fever, we'll call it, in New York, and that was great. So unfortunately, when she got hurt, we definitely saw a little bit of a drop off on the national level, but fortunately, our New York media really just kept expanding, and there's just so much room to grow in women's sports. And Ryan, you and I had the chance to talk about that the other day. Only 4% of media coverage in pro sports is dedicated to women's sports, which is just a tough battle that we face. But again, we're really on the come up, and we're putting in the work day in and day out to really see us expand and take over more of the market, because quite frankly, these women deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the true basketball fan can appreciate the level of basketball that's being played there. So for sure.
Absolutely.
So Edgar, the German Soccer League was one of the first leagues to really kind of get back going, right? Once the pandemic and shut down there. They kind of, in a lot of ways, much like the NBA and the WNBA, kind of set a model for how that can be done. What your thoughts on like how your team has pivoted with that and how the league has continued to put that product out there?
Sure. Actually, the Bundesliga, in terms of international soccer, was the first one to come back. So naturally, we were all freaking out. Now, as a marketer, and it was an interesting thing that happened, because as a marketer, if you are told that you're the first one that's going to come back, you're going to want to put it everywhere. And Brian will understand this as a PR person. It's like, if you're the first one, nobody else is going to compete and your game is going to be on, you're going to put it in every television, every place, because every message, you want to create content around it, because suddenly you're not competing against the Premier League. Suddenly you're not competing against La Liga, because those guys are shut down. So it's an opportunity for you to get a lot of eyeballs. But obviously, it's me thinking as a marketer, the people that had to make the tough decisions, being the first ones, is like, how are we opening the stadiums correctly? Are people going to be tested properly? If this backfires on us, like somebody gets sick, and this was back in May when we didn't have as much understanding of the virus as we do now. Everybody was still kind of like, like putting Clorox on everything and like, like not really knowing what was going on. So it was a very nerve-wracking couple of months. Fortunately, and if it's something that the Germans are really good at, is going to protocols. So there was a very good collaboration between local governments and then the government of Germany and the Bundesliga and the clubs. So there were very clear guidelines of how many people could go into the stadiums. They didn't want to do any bubbles, so they eliminated that very early on. But they said the amount of people that are going to be traveling, the amount of people that are going to be going to the stadiums, the kind of process of like checking your temperature, how many tests you do, what happens if somebody tests positive. All these steps were like super meticulously taken, and they're super careful. So they didn't let us promote it that much. So we suffer a little bit from that on the marketing end, but you understand it because ultimately you want to do the right thing. If you, like if you want to try to be cognizant that nobody has ever done this before. Unfortunately, we're able to end the season. We came out champions, so even better. And so the way the players adapted to it was great because, to interrupt the season and then to come back and to start playing. And then in soccer, you play games every week. And then the better teams play, 2 games a week, if depending on how many championships you're in. This year, because of the pandemic and because everything is so crunched up, these guys are playing games every 3 days, they're playing a game. So to maintain that mentality, to maintain that focus, to maintain all that has been very challenging, not just for the players, but like the coaching staff, and it trickles down across the entire organization, because you have to get ready for game day, all the time. But I think that it was done in a very careful way. We're watching very closely what was happening in other places, but we decided as a league to be the first ones because I think they saw the opportunity to do it in a very careful way. And at the same time, a team like Bayern Munich, they could have waited, but it's the smaller clubs, the San Paulo's, the lower divisions that were really suffering by being closed. And I know that, in our conversations, we know that CUNY and like a lot of the athletes that are not playing, the more that you're not playing, the more you're suffering. So in Germany, they didn't want to let this happen. So they found a way. And I know that just like them, other groups are going to find a way as well. One thing that I wanted to say, as Brian was talking about, is that I give guys like Brian and everybody working in women's sports a lot of credit, because you're right. Like a lot of people still don't watch it. The kind of growth that you're seeing is because there's a lot of guys behind the scenes just putting it out there. Like, and it's something that's like in your psyche, like a soccer club as old as Bayern. We have our women's soccer team. They don't get as much attention. And that's something that we're trying to change. Like right now is a moment to elevate all the athletes, to elevate whether they're male, whether they're female, whether it's basketball, just make the effort to make it like that. And I experienced that at MLS a little bit because soccer is not the biggest sport in the US, but I know that it requires a lot of creativity. And I see a lot of creativity from those teams. So like definitely kudos to you, Brian, and those guys.
Thank you, Edgar. I appreciate that.
So Edgar, we've got one of the students on the chat that asked your advice from a career standpoint, and they asked, their professor told them to hop around in the field of journalism, work a year there, work a year here, and then move on till you find the position you really want to have long term. What would be your advice as being somebody who kind of has done that in this climate?
Yeah, journalism is rough. Like I think that it's good to listen to your, like if you're studying journalism, that's what you want to do, that's great. I feel that though, you need to be really sure that that's what you want to do, because one, nobody knows where journalism on its own is going. Everybody's seen, even outside of the sports, how politics are covered, how culture is covered. It's not the same. It's not what it used to be. So journalism has become more of a marketing tool for people in power to give a message. And we're all collected in like bubbles, So it's very difficult to break through. If you're sure about journalism, I'm not gonna be the person to be like, oh, don't do it, it's too difficult, Any job has its difficulties. Work a year and then move on. That can be a good idea if you have something to move on to, or you have like a specific goal that you wanna follow. If you don't have a specific goal, my advice is always just be open to opportunity. Journalism is a good way to meet a lot of people is a good way to explore a bunch of different careers. My career started as in business journalism. My first internship was CNBC, and I was covering the stock market and oil futures and stuff like that. And I found that very boring. But I met a lot of people that helped me in my career, like in my writing, in my craft, how to approach an audience, things like that. So it definitely is helpful. I think it definitely helps if you know where you want to go. But if you don't know, it's good that you stick with journalism. I guess the thing that I will say that differs to your professor, even though I think they're right, is if you find yourself in a journalism career, you're enjoying it, and you see a way forward, don't just leave it. Like, make your own decisions and go with it. But if not, it's a great learning experience, like everything is. Any internship, even if they're having you make copies, bring coffees, ask questions, be active, anything helps. And I would say that approach it that way.
Great. I think that's really sound advice. Brian, you're kind of in that start, right? Is that kind of your approach, to try and find your footing?
Absolutely. Just really exactly. Edgar really hit it on the head there.
Great. So I have a question from Coach Dima.
Dima's here? Oh my God.
Yeah. So I apologize, Coach, for butchering your last name. So
I could never say it. Don't worry about it.
We're just going to go with Coach then. So Coach has a question for both of you guys. And he says you guys are both outstanding young men with incredible dedication and commitment. His question for you guys both respectfully, and Brian, we'll start with you. What is kind of your 5-year plan?
Sure. Well, first off, shout out Dima. Thank you for being here with us today. Miss you. Hopefully we can all get back to Baruch soon so we can catch up. But to go off the question there, 5-year plan. First off, I'm finishing up my master's degree in the fall. So that's checking off that box, which is exciting. So I wanted to get my master's, and then really looking ahead through those 5 years, there's a ton of room for growth, I believe, in my field and specifically within my organization. So we are part of BSE Global, which is the Brooklyn Nets and the New York Liberty, owned by Joe Tsai. Tremendous ownership group, super supportive, and they really just go the extra mile to take care of us. So that being said, I think there's a lot of room for growth as we look to expand on the Liberty side. I really think the sky's the limit. So I'm down the road. I would love to obviously take over one day as a director, which is what my boss currently is. And I feel like that's what I want to see myself do for a long period of time. Cause it's at that point you're in, and you're in charge obviously of all the PR and communications. And then from there, I mean, I'll see where the wind takes me. That's the beautiful thing of this industry is Edgar and I can do what we do for a lot of different teams and clubs, depending on the opportunity. So obviously I love New York. I really wouldn't want to leave here unless the right opportunity came. But that being said, short answer, I'd want to be a director, hopefully in 5 years.
Okay, in 5 years. Well, I've been very fortunate to be able to fulfill my professional dream in terms of working at a top club. I think in the short term, within the next year or so, I would want to be the head of media at the club where I'm at. That's something that I'm working towards. That's something that I feel that is feasible in the future. So that's definitely something that I want to get, professionally, I want to focus on. In 5 years, I'm going to be in my early 40s. So I feel that at that moment and at that time, I feel that my mentality in my 30s has been changed a little bit towards what my goals are, both professionally, but also personally. In terms of family, what I want to do. I feel that I've achieved a lot in my sports career. I don't think I ever want to leave it. But if I'm talking about the next 5 years, between the next 5 years, I want to try my hand at having some sort of my own business. I want to, whether that's something I've been playing around with the idea with doing something with wine. That's another passion that I have that's besides sports. But I definitely want it to be something that's not connected with financial security. So I've been working very hard. And I think Dima knows this, that a lot of us students that come to CUNY, we come to CUNY with a lot of financial, difficulties. And I've been fortunate that that at this moment, that's not a concern with the career that I've been able to put together. So ultimately what I would want is to explore my entrepreneurial side and have a little bit of fun in the next 5 years. But in the short term, it's probably try to get as high as I can in the role that I'm in media and communications in my company. And then after that, when the dust settles a little bit from that, I have the full team that I want and do everything like that. Try to explore possibilities in my own time and have a little bit of fun with that.
We got to see if Coach Dima has some footage of your one goal.
He probably doesn't even remember one. He's probably going to put a message saying he's lying or something like that. I know that guy.
He took the liberty to say that was before cameras.
Probably that's a polite way of saying he didn't score a goal, but I did. I know I did.
Too bad we can't patch Coach Dima in on this one and let that go. But those are great transitional plans, and it's really good information to share. As Brian, you're starting out your career, and Edgar, you're more established and looking for like, hey, can I pivot in this direction as well? Mm-hmm. So both really positive pieces of information on that one. Brian, you mentioned that there's not as much media dedicated to women's sports and things like that. So how does that impact your job? Do you feel like you have to be better? Do you feel like you have to create just more engaging content? Like for where you guys stand from the Liberty, how do you try to work around that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Ryan. And I wish I had honestly a perfect answer. And most of my work in grad school is really focused on that. It's like how can, and even there's such a intersection between PR and marketing, as obviously you've seen, Edgar. So really just a matter of continuing to do the work. And whether that's I mean, again, like just thinking it like in simple terms, where the play is getting better, the media coverage, like this summer, this was a big summer for us. Like our year over year viewership, pandemic or not related, it really brought us to that next level. So now part of it's going to be natural. Part of it, hopefully there's going to be some more media covering us as a result. But then going back to your earlier point, Ryan, I think really like where we have to be so careful and so strategic with everything that we do. Everything needs to be, how can we make this much better? We're always just trying to like take what we have and just expand it tenfold. So I think obviously it's a little bit of we could talk about this for an hour,
Sure.
But that being said, I really think just being super diligent and super strategic over the next few years. These are a few important years, and that's really why we made an emphasis on playing this season, because we saw a lot of momentum coming out from 2019 on. And I really think it's almost like a wave, and we're going to keep building up this wave and really see where it can take us,
Yeah. And I think that's one thing the WNBA has done really well with their marketing campaign. There's an intentionality to it, right? They have a long reaching goal. And, the impressive thing was like during this summer where we saw all the different social justice campaigns, it just seemed organic with the WNBA, right? Because it's a league that is predominantly women of color, and other different metrics of diversity. They're always fighting for that justice and that equal opportunity. So as a viewer, it was very clear that there was an intentionality and like an authentic manner to it.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Ryan. And I really think, like, going back to the earlier question, that's such a huge part of what we do. And it's the most important thing for us is it's not new. We've been doing this work. We're going to continue to do this work. So it doesn't stop here. It's just the beginning. But again, it's such an important topic on our end that we're always constantly conscious of, from a PR side, from a marketing side, and just from an overall business side, and taking care of our players and their families and the full nine. So
that's great. So Edgar, what is it going to take for the MLS to carve into the U.S. sports landscape in a more impactful way, right? You and I had discussed that our sports market is overly saturated, with collegiate sports and professional sports. In your opinion, based on seeing how Bayern Munich has been successful in Germany and the way like major soccer organizations. How does that develop here in the US with the MLS?
I think they need to primarily manage expectations. I mean, obviously the natural comparison with MLS is going to be international leagues and clubs. But I think that a lot of people fail to understand that MLS was created in 1996, while these other entities have been around for over 100 years. So it's almost an unfair comparison to ask MLS at this point to be at that level, both in quality and in and the way they showcase themselves. So manage that expectation that you're another sport that's growing. Soccer has been around forever here in the US. It's a young league, and I think that they're doing things fine, to be honest. Because if you looked at back in 2001, 2002, they were almost going under. They had like 10, 12 teams, a couple of teams like down in Florida had folded. It was bad. Today, if you go to Atlanta and you see the stadium for Atlanta, or if you go to Seattle and you see it packed up every single weekend, you kind of realize that they have carved, like a part of the sports, community. Like they found a place. Obviously, it's not as big as some of the other sports, and I don't think they should be thinking about it in those terms. But I think they're doing a very good job so far. Now, in terms of growth, there's a lot of things that they can do, and for me, growth needs to happen less in the marketing side and more in the sporting side. So they were always very famous, or still are famous, about bringing players that are ending their careers in Europe and bringing them here. And over the years, they become a little bit more smarter about bringing younger talent that's better. So like one example is this kid, Miguel Almiron from Paraguay. Nobody knew who the kid was. And they signed him for the Atlanta team. So Atlanta United played with him. Newcastle from the Premier League took him, and now he's having an outstanding career there. And suddenly you become a little bit of a feeder league, where like the same way that the Mexican league or the Argentinian league are down in South America giving players to Europe, because Europe just simply has more money and more power to spend. Yeah. So if you're growing the quality of the teams on the field, then that's where you should go. Because for me, and this is just a completely personal opinion, I have no idea how they think about it in MLS. I haven't worked with those guys in like 5 years or so I don't know if this is what they're focusing on. But my advice, and every time I talk to somebody with MLS, is like, beat Mexico, meet the Mexican teams. There's one championship that matters here in CONCACAF, and it's called the CONCACAF Champions League. And this is the only opportunity you have to win a title and then go to a Club World Cup and play a team like Bayern Munich, play a team like Real Madrid, and try to beat them. You cannot beat them yet, but you need to put yourself in these positions. Put yourself in the position of competing in that way, because you start winning those games, suddenly people here who are more skeptical about it, they're like, oh shit, they're for real. No, I'm sorry. But these guys can play. And I think that's the biggest knock on MLS. They're like, oh, Americans don't know this and that. You start showing the field, you put some money in the academies, you start developing some quality players. Suddenly you have something good, because you already have the marketing, you have the stadiums, and you have the product. You have, ever since David Beckham came in, things started changing a little bit. Then you have other guys coming in that are raising it a little bit more. Now is a moment to actually focus on the quality, on the overall quality of the league, and be the best in your immediate region, and then take it over to a different place and start making a name for yourself. At the same time, there's things that don't depend on you. Keep working on your marketing, keep giving people a good experience at the stadium, so that dad that is bringing his kid, that kid starts relating himself to as a New York Red Bulls fan or as a NYCFC fan, and it becomes part of his life, because eventually that kid, he's gonna have the spending power, and he's gonna be transmitting this tradition down to others. So it'll take a little while, but I think they're taking the right steps. But it's going to take a bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I think you bring up a good point, right? Like the one thing they do have control on is the league quality, right? And like the WNBA, and Brian, you could speak to this, is the game is at a very super high level. So like if you're not into it, whatever, that's your choice as the consumer, but it's not going to be for a lack of quality of product. And I think is struggling with that a little bit now.
from a marketing standpoint, always there's always going to be detractors. Oh, women can play this sport. Oh, you can dunk, or soccer is not a sport for Americans, this and that. Forget about that. You keep going. And then while that's happening on the field, from a PR marketing standpoint, you're being creative. And I feel that a lot of like, like what Brian is doing, what MLS is doing, teams that are not, up there yet in terms of like attention are doing, is like being very reactive to new things. Like what does your app have? How are you using things like TikTok? How are you communicating with people and younger people in a way that's more, that's more disruptive. So it's not usually like, oh, let's just write this press release and send it out and see who gets it. It's trying to be a little bit ahead of the curve on like, what's the next thing that's coming so that my message resonates and resonates with the right audience and the right people, who to me is that younger crowd, because eventually those are the people that are going to carry you. That's what I'm focusing on at Bayern right now. I don't want people who, yeah, sure, they're like MLS, NFL, whatever fans that are older. Sure, if they're interested, welcome. My focus is in those that are growing up and discovering the team for the first time. Because as big as Bayern is, a lot of people don't know it. So I want to focus on those people and I want them to know it, so that, eventually maybe they're not the biggest fans, but they're a casual fan. And we know from behavior, from an audience nowadays, that you can put your attention on everything. We compete on everything. We're all on Netflix, we're on Hulu, you can be a fan of multiple sports, on multiple teams. So I think there's room for everybody if you're providing the right context and the right content.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. So I've got one more question from the chat, and then I'm going to give you guys a chance to kind of give some last minute sounding advice for our students who are still with us here. Brian, I'm going to let you take this question, and then Edgar as well. So this student is talking about the value of analytics in pro sports and how that's becoming, everything's analyzed, right? And so is focusing your craft on the analytics of sports a good way to get your foot into the door for sports media? Or would you guys suggest not as much?
I'll start out, Ryan. I think analytics is a great route altogether in pro sports, right? Everything, like you said, is shifting towards the analytical side, to the point where we have stats that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. And I know specifically within baseball, that's the hottest thing, is bringing in a team full of analytic people to really just create numbers that weren't there and really try to see in between the lines. So analytics is a great path, but almost if you want to do sports media, it will certainly get you in the door. But I think analytics is a path that, if you're good at math and if you're an econ major or something along those lines, that's something that will take you your whole career, because everything's going towards the analytics side.
Great.
I like that analytics is super important right now in the world of professional sports. Like, if there's a team out there that is not informing themselves both in the sporting side and in the, like promotion, marketing, advertising side, and not doing analytics, you have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea how things are resonating. So you gotta know, you gotta have somebody who knows that. So I'll definitely encourage this student, if that's something that they're interested in, to definitely do it. But I would give that with a caveat and a word of caution. For the most part, especially when you're starting out, just be open to a lot of different things. Like just be very versatile. Like, if you want your emphasis to be analytics, that's great. But be willing to learn about the marketing side of things. Be willing to learn about the, like the PR side of things. Willing to learn about the partnership side of things. Because those are the things that, the analytics on their own, they provide information. But if you can break them down and provide an explanation for whoever needs it, that's an amazing thing. Because the way that partnerships market, like the head of my partnerships at a club looks at analytics is very different to the way of the head of social looks at it. The head of social wants this engagement, wants this stuff. The other person wants to sell a product to somebody else. So if you have a little bit of understanding of how the different departments work, that's a really good thing to do. But analytics is a great route to go for sure.
Great. So guys, you've been really gracious with your time. I'm going to give you guys a chance to wrap up, and Brian will start, or Edgar will start with you on this. What is one piece of advice you would want to go back and tell college age Edgar? You know, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
So college Edgar was not really goals oriented, not until like senior year. You know, like I remember being in a lot of these conversations with like people who were presenting and stuff like that, and not really understanding the concept of goal setting, of like, or of having some kind of a plan. I was kind of just going through the emotions a little bit more, and I never always really had it together. So if I was able to say something to that Edgar, is make sure that you have an idea, not even just the particular goal, not like, you don't have to know for sure, but have an idea what it is you like to do. Because I feel that, I mean, not that I'm regretful with anything in my career or anything like that. I think I had a great career, but I think I would have arrived to it a little bit faster and a little bit less painfully if you have like a little bit of a path set up for you. What am I studying? What am I studying? What am I prioritizing? What am I prioritizing? And I think it had to do, it connects a little bit with the question that you asked a little bit before about, what somebody asked a little bit before about how you spend your time now that you're not playing sports. And I think Brian answered it he answered it in a very great way, in saying that, you know, you set up your priorities. You know, like if you have organized priorities on the things that are important to you, then you'll know how to spend your time. At the time as a student, I didn't know how to do that well. So I think that's what I would go back and tell myself. What is important to you? How do you want to spend your time? And then you just go there and do that and trust the process.
Awesome. Brian, what about you? What would you tell yourself 2 years ago?
So I think Edgar really just hit it on the head, and obviously I'll elaborate, but so much really tied to trusting that process, right? So for me, whether it was like while I was a student athlete, I was super active within the Brook athletics community, doing a ton of different internship work and broadcasting games. Now, this is stuff that was literally laying the foundation for my current career, that back then it just felt like, you know, I mean, there was a certain level of uncertainty, but little did I know that that work that I was doing and that extra work and creating those relationships was laying the foundation for my career right now. And I wouldn't be on the path that I am without it. So I know on the undergrad side, it's kind of tough sometimes. You're doing a lot of work, balancing a lot of things, especially as a student athlete, but the work you're doing matters. And that's really the best message I can give anyone on this call. The work you're doing matters, and in due time, you're going to get that right opportunity for you. So really just keep going, keep working, put your head down and keep grinding. And that's the best, pretty much the best advice I would give my younger self, because sometimes it felt like the work I was doing like wasn't necessarily translating. But then again, like I said, in due time, everything came together at the perfect time.
Perfect. Both great piece of advice. So for everybody who's still in the chat, that concludes our time for this edition of Talk About It Tuesday with CUNY Athletic Conference, sponsored by the Hospital for Special Surgery. Brian and Edgar, I want to thank both of you for dedicating this time. This was an enjoyable thing, and I think our current student athletes got a lot out of this, especially the really, really sound career advice from both of you. So for any of our student athletes who want to watch this is available on CUNYathletic.com and all of our CUNYAC social media sites. Brian and Edgar, thanks for your time. Be well.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Ryan. Take care, everybody.